Welcome back to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters. And if you haven't seen them already, make sure to check out our companion videos that we made where we go in depth on CJ Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship, and Sidney Brown. Those are great to pair with the conversation we're about to have today. But as we look into today's conversation, we're talking safeties. CJ Gardner-Johnson is back. Reed Blankenship looks to continue growing after looking good in his first year as a starter. And unfortunately, Sidney Brown will likely miss the start of the year, but Cooper DeJean may take some snaps at safety. Devontae Maddox is practicing back there as well. So, Eric, give me your take on this unit. What do you like about the safety group?
Yeah, I like that there are players who are highly instinctive. They have a good feel for what the offense is trying to do in general, just from a high level overview. But even more specifically, during the play, they can tease out like who is the first read. And I wouldn't say any of these guys are near the top of their position for athleticism, but they make up for it by breaking on the ball quickly. They're also extremely fearless players. You can see many examples of all three of them, Gardner, Johnson, Blankenship, and Brown, just pretty much throwing caution to the wind and putting their body on the line against players much larger than them. When they're very exposed in the open field, not being shy to come in and try to make like a impact play. That goes a long way, because there was a lot of, I don't know what the phrase to use is, but like you could say like soft play last year that cost them. Guys getting just washed out of the play, really poor tackling efforts, just like arm tackles, so on and so forth. And these guys have that kind of that lunch pail mentality, and that sets a tone for the rest of the defense. And when you have, the safeties, everyone talks about this. This is one of the most important positions in the Fangio style defense. You want tone setters back there. Though that's what I like about this unit. Now, I don't know if I want to jump the gun to weaknesses, but what do you think in terms of the strengths of the unit?
Yeah, so you said these guys aren't at the top of, they're not at the top of the athleticism spectrum for safeties or at their position. Well, I wouldn't say they're not Jalen Petrie fast. I believe he ran a 4.3 at his pro day. He's also 198 pounds. The average 40 time for a safety is 4.56. All of the Eagles safeties ran faster than that. And I'm going to include DeJean and Maddox in this conversation because both of them have been taking snaps there in OTAs. All the Eagles safeties ran faster than that. DeJean, Sidney, and CJ all ran in the 4.4s. Maddox ran in the 4.3s during his combine. I know that was several years ago, but I imagine he's probably a 4.4 guy at this point in his career. Obviously, testing time is a little bit different than play time, but watch Sidney Brown play. He plays fast. You watch, you watch, who's our other guy? CJ play. He plays fast as well. And Reed plays fast because he can diagnose quickly, can process quickly. And even then, his 4.55 was a slight tick faster than the average 40 time for safety. So this is a fast and athletic unit. And then you also look at, like I compared Jalen Petrie at 198 pounds. CJ and Sidney both weighed about 210, 211 at their combine. That's their lightest weight they're going to be. They cut weight so they could run a faster 40. They're probably both around the 215 range. So it's not just that are they the fastest guys ever at their position? No, but they're all above average, and they got some sides to them. And like you said, they're going to hit you. They are going to bring the energy. They're going to bring the physicality and the intensity. Watching Sidney just on the field last year, when he was finally got to get on the field consistently, just the energy and the juice that he brought to that defense was night and day. Now the rest of the guys couldn't match. You had some guys that just couldn't match what he brings, but I think they got some pieces around, especially with CJ there now that can match that energy. So much so that Sidney was kind of running into players and kind of doing some things that probably could have drew some penalties after plays. But for a team that needed it, I like that he showed that last year. They're also versatile. Pretty much all of them except Reed can play in the slot. They are also players that can play post safety or be box safeties. And this is important because you need to be able to rotate and move these guys around, especially with the way this defense is constructed. You need guys that can play big nickel or big dime. This linebacking unit is probably the weakness of this defense overall. So you might need to take one of those guys off the field, and you can put one of these guys on the field in certain situations. So those are really the strengths that I saw from the unit. In terms of their weaknesses, overall, I thought it was kind of tough to come up with what the weaknesses are. I think individually you can look at a few players like CJ and Sydney are guys that aren't great tacklers. DeJean has been a good tackler throughout his career in college. Obviously, it remains to be seen if that translates to the NFL. Reed is a good tackler, so it's like they kind of offset a little bit. It was tough for me to come up with a weakness. I think this is a pretty solid unit overall, but a couple things off the top of my mind. Star power, I guess they don't really have a true elite player at their position. Some people are probably going to shit on me on the comments and say CJ's one of the best players at his position. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's one of the best players at his position. He got 6 interceptions when he played with the Eagles. Yes, I know that a lot of those were tip passes. You have to put yourself in position to make those plays, but you watch him play and you watch Justin Simmons play, like Simmons is making plays because he's been playing safety his whole life, right? He is making plays where he's understanding how the offense wants to attack the coverage and the defense and their weaknesses, and he's reading plays and kind of sometimes he's freelancing into interceptions because he knows how offenses want to attack. CJ has, I want to pull these numbers up real quick. CJ is still pretty new to the position. He's still learning some of those nuances of playing deep safety. CJ was primarily a slot player in college and in the NFL with the Saints until he came to the Eagles. So the first time he got real safety experience was the 2022 season. And then in 2023, he ended up getting hurt. Only played 3 games, so he didn't really get to build on that too much. CJ played 911 snaps at deep safety between the college and NFL levels. Reed played over 2,400 for comparison. So when I'm watching film on these guys, I'm seeing CJ is breaking on the ball faster, and he's like, you can tell he's just covering ground faster than Reed is, but Reed stays in better positions initially, so he doesn't have to catch up to those spots. He doesn't make as many false steps, or he takes better angles to the ball. So there's just those little nuances. The whole thing to say is, I like CJ. Is he an elite player at the position? No, and I don't think they have an elite player there. And again, I'm trying to come up with weaknesses of the unit. So star power, I think there's some injury concerns. CJ has been injured. We discussed that in his podcast. Maddox, if he does end up playing safety, has missed a lot of games over the years. Sidney Brown's coming off a torn ACL. Reed missed several games last year. They're all pretty much separate issues. Nothing that's too concerning. Maybe depth is an issue. You have CJ, Reed, and Sidney. Is Maddox your 4th safety? He has injury concerns. You touched on that in our cornerback podcast. Is he the best guy to have as a depth piece because of his injury concerns? And then DeJean, I know a lot of people kind of just pencil him in as he's going to play safety, but he's never played safety. He really has not ever played safety. Maybe he did in college, or high school, but in college he didn't play safety. So it's different playing top down than it is from the front of the defense to the back. So, and we saw this with Sidney Brown last year. He was a similar player, but Sidney had way more experience actually comparatively playing deep safety. And it still took him some time to find his way on the field. And that was a safety unit that needed people to step up. This is a unit that I think is a little bit better top to bottom, but he's never played that position. So if injuries force him into that position, is he going to be ready? I don't know about that. So I think there's some questions about depth as well.
You mentioned some of those personnel packages, big nickel and big dime. Just for those who may be unfamiliar, big nickel, essentially nickel designates 5 defensive backs, and you're just adding in another safety. So that's 3 safeties and then your 2 corners. And big dime, now you just have 6 defensive backs with 3 safeties, and that's paired with 3 cornerbacks. And we touched on this earlier in the offseason. We expect Fangio to run quite a bit of dime because that's how the roster is constructed, even though he ran it almost never last year. Or at least we hope that he runs dime because that's where the strength of, or the depth of this team is. And not to mention, they have a lot of players who can play in coverage and also have enough physicality to play the run. We mentioned some of them, like Brown, Gardner Johnson, DeJean. so on. Yeah, even Maddox. Now, the weaknesses I've identified are over aggressiveness. I think obviously we talked about it with Brown. He plays with reckless abandon. Gardner Johnson, his over aggressiveness leads to missed tackles. And then with Blankenship, like there was just a few plays. I wouldn't say it's a recurrent pattern with him, but if you can clip the one play, the Debo Samuel touchdown against the 49ers, he was really exposed in the middle of the field, pretty much the last defender who could make the tackle, and he played it too aggressive and just got picked off on a big block where had he retreated a little bit, he probably could have slowed the guy down or made the tackle. Now, listen, you're not going to make this is an extremely hard play to make in the open field, and I mentioned this before, he was banged up at the time. You mentioned it where he would try to undercut corner routes, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And in fact, if your safety was never over aggressive, I would identify that as an issue. Like, you want to have some moments where you've bit off more than you could chew, because otherwise you're never making a play. I think if you have a dial where 10 is the most aggression, I just want to have them be more like an 8, whereas I feel like they're closer to the max right now. And then you mentioned it, injuries. Now, of the two of us, I'm the big fear monger over injuries, but specifically with the safety group, it is a concern. As you mentioned, Blankenship had a litany of injuries, but they were fairly small. Last year, he did have the groin surgery. Sidney Brown with the ACL, and then Gardner Johnson throughout his career has had some fluky injuries. So that just naturally begs the question of, if one of these guys goes down, do you have enough players to fill in for them? Which is why they're trying out some of these other guys at safety in training camp. I don't want to jump the gun, but maybe we could discuss if they need to add a little bit more depth later on in the pod.
Yeah, I guess we could jump to that now. I wanted to talk about how Fangio uses his safeties, but we could jump to that in a minute. Let's kind of jump let's first jump to Maddox before we jump to potential additions. So Maddox, he's started to get some reps at safety. He also ended up, I know a lot of people just tuned this game out because we were ready to be done with it, and so was I. But the playoff game last year, he played safety the entire game. Part of that was because Blankenship was out. But Maddox has played safety before. He's played in limited snaps. It hasn't really been anything extensively. But he's played safety before, and it just feels like Eagles fans have been talking about Maddox transitioning to safety almost since he's been on the team. Maybe that's just me misremembering some of these conversations, but it always felt like people were talking about him moving to safety. Well, it looks like now they're legitimately looking at giving him actual looks there. And I think it's a good thing for him, because I think his game can transition, especially as he ages, to safety. You see a lot of corners kind of, they age out of corner and they age into safety as their careers progress later in their careers. So we'll see how this works out with Maddox. Now, his athleticism fits a quarters or a post safety role. So what I mean by that is, in quarters, your role as a safety is to play the vertical of number 2. That is your first assignment. So what that means is, the number 2 receiver, whether that's a tight end or slot receiver to your side of the field, if they run verticals, which is usually about 7 to 8 yards or deeper, you match that receiver at that point in time, wherever they go. So it turns into man coverage, essentially, if they run anything vertical. Well, guess what? You're going to need some speed, because what if they put Tyreek Hill in the slot and you are playing the vertical of number 2? You need a guy that can run with him. Maddox is a pretty fast player. He'll be one of the faster safeties if he does eventually transition to a full-time safety role. So I like that. There was a great play. He showed a lot of range on a play as a post safety, that middle safety against the Bucs. Now, can he be a run stopper top down? That's a different type of tackle. It's a different way of fitting the box. It's different fitting runs because he's kind of a honey badger. He'll stick his face into traffic, right? But he's been doing that at a much closer to the line of scrimmage than filling in from 10 to 12 yards deep. against a running back that's usually starting 5 to 7 yards behind a line of scrimmage already. So that's guys really gained a lot of momentum coming at you. Is he going to step up and make those tackles? He will be one of the smaller safeties. It's a different role. Now you can mitigate that some with and Fangio's defense if you want to rotate their safeties. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But if you rotate him, you can get him in positions where he is playing coverage more. So if it gets to the point where injuries take its toll and he has to play, and that does become an issue, you can mitigate some of that. So, and here's the other thing: he's most likely a depth piece at safety. Whether or not he wins the slot job, I think he's more likely a depth piece at safety than a starter, especially if they don't bring someone else in. But his versatility to play in the slot allows him to keep an extra player on the roster. So if they get to a point in the offseason where they're trying to discuss whether they need to keep Job or they need to keep Ricks or someone like that towards the end of the roster, and Maddox can fill in as your fourth safety and also take a spot as your slot corner and not having to add anyone else, that kind of helps you with the roster math a little bit. But I view Maddox moving to safety as a little more than just OTA. We're trying stuff out because it's not like they had done this a whole lot in years past. Not to my knowledge. Call me out in the comments if you guys remember differently. But I think there's something to this. Is he going to be a starter? Probably not. But I think it is important to see him starting to take this role and this step if he is going to make this team.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where it's like you have all these corners who have enough talent to make most NFL teams. And then you have three quote unquote unreliable, or let's call them, not players that you can expect to play every game at full strength. They're a little bit more of a volatile safety group. I'll say it like that. Well, if you can have a guy who can moonlight as safety and also be your starting or backup slot, that's highly valuable when there's a lot of tough roster decisions that they're going to have to make. Now, I would want to try DeJean there because I think that's your long-term future as opposed to Maddox. This might be the last year he plays. I'm going to be biased towards giving the younger guy, especially one that you've invested a high pick in, the chance to develop, especially because he was projected to be able to play in that role pre-draft. When Maddox is on the field, he's good. That's never been the issue. It's just you can't count on him to be on the field, which is why the Eagles were comfortable bringing him back for peanuts instead of $8 million. So if he makes the roster and he can moonlight as safety and play your starting or backup slot, I like it. The one issue with that is, do you really want to have a player who's that injury prone be the one to patch your hole on your ship? I wouldn't. Especially if I have potentially a younger option with a higher upside. So that's why in our previous pod, I predicted that Maddox wouldn't make it. Now, thinking about it more, I think he will make it because of the reasons you mentioned, just because they're so thin at safety right now. Now, if they do bring in an outside body, I think he's as good as gone. Because the chance that he's going to win that slot role over Rodgers and DeJean, to me, is slim, even though he has way more experience. I mean, those guys have no experience at slot, right? And he's got a ton of experience. I don't even think it comes down to that. I think it just comes down to, we talked about it a bunch. Continuity is very important in this style of defense. And you can only build continuity if you start getting these young guys on the field. So,
yeah. So I there's a good segue into the DeJean conversation. So, I personally don't think he's going to play the safety all that often this year. I know most people do. A lot of people think he's going to slide right in, but he's never played it. It is different playing safety, and it's not even just number one. It's just different playing top down than bottom up. It's a different look. A lot of things are different. Communication is different. I played corner in college. Wasn't a big time college, but I had way less communication that I had to do at that position than when we played than what safeties have to do. I talked about it in the Reed Blankenship conversation. I think I made a very good statement about why Reed's so valuable to this team, and it's his communication, his ability to get everyone on the same page. That takes time to do. And for a rookie in the NFL who's never played safety, I think that takes some transitioning too. And I think it's very similar to Sidney Brown last year when he didn't play right away because he was learning the NFL. He's new to it, and he's trying to play a newer position to him. So I think it's just going to be a situation where if we get into this season and they get to a fourth safety, I think they're probably going to go with the guy. Has Maddox played a ton of safety? No, but he's been in the NFL a while. He understands how defenses work. He understands where teams try and attack you. If I had to say who would be the better safety day one, my guess would probably be Maddox because he has more experience playing football. He's played football for 7 or 8 more years than Cooper DeJean has. Right there's value and that right there. So, just because looking in the short term, when coaches are in the heat of battle and they have to win a game, because you look at Nick Sirianni this year, he very well may be coaching for his life for the Eagles. Now, I think the Eagles will probably have a good year, but if it comes to a situation where he's in a high pressure situation, does he want to go with a rookie that's never played safety over 7-year NFL vet? He's never played safety, but he should have a good understanding of how defenses work that he'll probably slide in a little bit better right away. And I think this is probably part of the reason why CJ Gardner-Johnson slid in and played safety a little better when he just started doing it in 2022 is because he had several years of experience in the NFL already and understanding defenses and where teams want to attack and how everything works out. So just for that reason, for the short term, when coaches get in the heat of the battle, they're going to put who they think is their best, gives them the best chance to win on the field right away. And I think if it came down to it, you end up having to put DeJean or Maddox at safety right away. I think it ends up being Maddox. I understand your point about DeJean. He is a long-term option, so you want to get him experience. It's a tough game to play. Do you go with experience or the better player? And DeJean might be the better player, but we don't know it yet, and we got to project. Now, having said that, I think this is a good reason why they probably should bring in another safety, especially with Sidney Brown probably not going to be ready to start the year. They probably should bring in someone else. So is there anyone that you'd like to bring in? Do you have a couple names off the top of your head that you'd like for them to add to this team?
Oh, there's only one guy. All the Eagles fans know him, Justin Simmons. Now, the reason he's brought up is he's a multi-time Pro Bowler. He played with Fangio. From what I've heard, they have a good rapport. You've heard some of the rumblings of some of the Dolphins players didn't like him, but Simmons has spoke glowingly of Fangio, and he had some of his best seasons with him. As you mentioned, he has more experience than anyone else they have by a mile. He's a really good player. He's very big for a safety, especially comparing him to like Gardner-Johnson and the stature of like Brown. Yeah, Brown is like jacked, but Simmons is very tall, and he's not quite as rangy as he once was. Obviously, now he's into his 30s, but just his combination of anticipation with his height and long arms, he can cover a lot of ground and just disrupt receivers at the catch point. He'll mix it up near the line of scrimmage a lot. He's just a very good player. Now, this is something we touched on in linebackers. I think it's true, probably less true for safeties. They age a little more gracefully, where you can have guys in their early 30s who are playing great ball, especially because the safety position is such a cerebral one. You can make up for some of the athletic requirements with great film study and experience, which he has. He would be a welcomed addition. They have the cap space. Here's where I think the hang-up is. I think Simmons, this is the last, let's call it sizable contract that he'll likely sign in the NFL. He'll want a multi-year deal. And I'm sure the Eagles are like, hey, we'll give you whatever you want, but only for 1 year. I'm totally speculating, but to me, that's probably what the hang up would be. Otherwise, this guy would be signed because it's a match made in heaven. He would really change the tenor of this defense, in my opinion. And he would be amongst the most experienced players other than like Slay. He's pretty much neck and neck with him in terms of experience on the whole defense. And he's probably reached a level of play higher than anyone else. Now, is it possible that he's cooked? Where it's like, yeah, maybe he's a good tackler and has good ball skills and can read what the offense is trying to do, but just can't move anymore. It's possible. And that the trouble with that is you probably don't realize that until you've already given him 10 plus million. It's not like you can bring him in for a workout and see what he has left. That's where the due diligence really comes in. There's no one else. I think Quandre Diggs might be out there, but he had a steep fall off. And I looked at some of the other
I disagree with that. I think he'd be a good fit for the team.
Okay.
No, yeah. I mean Simmons is a guy, but I think Diggs can still bring a lot to the defense, especially in terms of like, the veteran presence that you need out of safeties. I think he'd be a good guy to add to the unit. I agree with you about Simmons. I think of him as kind of like the TJ Edwards of safeties in terms of he's not the greatest athlete for the position, but he's just a very good player. Now he's probably better than TJ Edwards is at his position. He's been a multi-time All-Pro. Now TJ is really starting to ascend to the top of the linebacker group, but he was he was like a 4.6 40 guy coming out of college. But the reason why he was able to succeed in the NFL is very much like what you talked about, how linebackers age more gracefully than some positions like corner, is because, or even athletes that aren't the greatest athletes can play for a long time at these positions. You have to think so much at linebacker and safety that it will slow you down if you don't know what's going on. But if you're a guy that is really instinctual, you process well, you have good football IQ, you understand how offenses want to attack, you understand what the defense is trying to take away, where you're trying to funnel the ball, and you can play fast, it allows you to play faster than those other guys. So that's what Simmons is. It's just a lot of instincts, a lot of processing, a lot of the things that you can't quantify. That's what he brings to the team. So I think he is able to age better because of that. The one concern I do have with him is because he isn't a fantastic athlete, he could fall off faster. We talked about this in our Bradbury and Slay discussion. Slay was a much better athlete coming out of college than Bradbury was. And that's why you see Slay is still the better athlete now, or a big reason why, is because he was a better athlete just overall. So when he did start to lose a step, he had more steps to lose. Well, Simmons, he's kind of like on that bottom fringe in terms of athleticism for the position. Yes, he plays fast because of his processing. Does he fall off sooner because he wasn't a great athlete to begin with? I don't know. Only time will tell at that point in time.
Yeah,
but
real quick.
Just to talk about. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
I will give a little pushback because it is true that he ran a really slow 40 time, and we talked about it. Its safeties are one position in the secondary that can get away with it. Try to find a good outside corner who ran 4.6. It's pretty much impossible. But if you look at his jumps and his quickness testing, his like shuttles, they were off the charts. So I think maybe it was more like bad running form and really limited top end speed. But some of the other traits that most people would put in the back bucket of like overall athleticism, he's good, and it shows up. Like he can, probably less so now, but couple years ago, you would see him go way up the ladder and make plays on the ball and just really good change of direction for a guy who's 6'2". So I'd agree with you. He by no means is he a great athlete in his 30s now, but it's not like Bradbury. Let's put it that way.
Right. And Bradbury didn't have those. He didn't have great agility measurements to go along with his 40 time that was below average for his position either. And I think if you look at Bradbury, his strengths were his length, really, his ability to get his hands on receivers and run with them. I don't think he was necessarily a extremely fluid, quick, short area quickness athlete. So all of that kind of fell off faster. So listen, I think you gave a great point why Simmons probably has a little bit, a little bit longer of a career than Bradbury will have. Now looking at some other guys, I think guys like Quandre Diggs would be good to add to the team if Simmons doesn't come here. I think Micah Hyde would be good to add as well. Again, these are older players, but it's at that, like we've talked about, at the position where your knowledge can help you play faster and help you maintain a little bit longer in the league. Eddie Jackson's a guy you could potentially bring in. I'd just for more so for depth and the understanding of Fangio's defense, playing with him before, knowing how to play in that role. On top of that, Quandre Diggs, he didn't play under Fangio to my knowledge. He did playing with the Seahawks. They were running a very Fangio-esque defense. So he's been playing a lot of these quarters coverages, a lot of cover 6. He's been playing a lot of these, the way that they play cover 3, the way that Fangio plays cover 3 with his adjustments. A lot of that stuff is very similar on tape. So he'll come in with an understanding of a general idea of how they want to run the defense. Now, there's going to be little nuances that are different here and there, but that's just another boost to Quandre Diggs. I don't think Micah Hyde has a real connection to Fangio, but Buffalo did play a solid amount of similar coverages that Fangio runs as well, and he's a veteran. He would be a guy that could come in and give you solid action as well. Now, Simmons would be the guy that I would go with out of the 3, but I don't think, listen, Micah Hyde he's been an all-pro very recently, and Buffalo's defense was like a top 5 or 10 defense, and they had a shit ton of injuries last year and the year before, and Micah Hyde was a big part of that team, both those teams. Let's look at the future outlook of this unit overall. If you go back to our podcast we did with CJ, I discussed how I think he's probably here for this year and next year, just the way the contract breaks down. I'll just leave it at that. You can check out that episode for a more in-depth breakdown of CJ's contract. Reed is signed through 2025. Sidney is tied to the Eagles through 2026. So for the next several seasons, and I guess I should jump back real quick. Obviously, Maddox, 1-year contract, and DeJean is going to be tied to the team through 2027. So you do have some guys that you can fit in for the long term. And in the next 2 years, I mean, you're pretty set at the position. So when we look to the draft and free agency next year, I don't really see this as a position that they're trying to upgrade or add too many pieces to, unless there's some major injuries that really affects the units. I don't know if you had any thoughts on these guys.
Yeah, I agree. Gardner Johnson's probably a 2-year guy. And then, hopefully Blankenship can be a long-term stalwart on this defense. And then Brown, like I said earlier, I like Brown as a sub-package guy who's probably going to play more on the order of 400 snaps as opposed to a bona fide starter playing 800 snaps. But he does have the potential to develop into more than that. So I think they may target the position, next year, whether it's in the draft or trying to sign a free agent. I don't know who will be available. But yeah, probably more depth than going out and trying to sign a top line guy. Now, by all accounts, they did try hard for Xavier McKinney, but they got outbid by Green Bay. And I'm not that upset about it because $17 million, I think, is what they're paying him for a guy who's slow. That would be a tough pill to swallow. I think McKinney's awesome. I'm not going to say he's not a great player because he is, and I wanted him. But one of the things we talked about is last year, one of the things that stuck out was the Eagles' defense was slow. McKinney does nothing to remedy that problem. But Gardner Johnson, Brown, they do. They have a lot more juice to them. And so if they are going to continue to bring in guys, I'm just biased towards more athletic players. The other thing about McKinney is he's an extremely conservative safety. And one of the criticisms of the Fangio defense is that it's already conservative. Now, we've done several videos now that dispel that narrative about him, but you know, we need some playmakers, and I think that's what we're targeting with the safeties, and I'm a fan of it. That does kind of lead us into, I think we glossed over it a bit, is how Fangio does like to use his safeties, just specifically on a down to down basis. Do you want to discuss that at all?
So they are in split safety looks pre-snap the vast majority of the time. If you go through, I didn't write this number down. In all my research I didn't put this in the notes, but I believe they were 23rd in total snaps where they had a safety play in the box last season in the NFL. So they weren't last, but they just don't drop their safeties into the box pre-snap a ton. They will do it time to time, but it's not their mainly what they do. Their safeties are going to fit the run more often than not from the top down than fitting it in the box. So you need guys that are able to make, a lot of times these kind of turn into open field tackles a little bit. Those safeties are rotating down and the ball is oftentimes being funneled into that player because they end up being the free hitter, the unaccounted for player by the offense. Sometimes those turn into like open field tackles with the running back coming at you charging one on one, and you have to be able to make these tackles. So it's not easy to do, right? You're not having to battle offensive linemen and tight ends as much as teams like the early 2010 Seahawks teams where they'd rotate Cam Chancellor into the box. They're not having to do that quite as much, but there is a job to play of playing the run from the top down and getting in there. Now, they also need someone that can play a post safety as they are playing cover 1 or cover 3 around 50 to 55% of the time. Fangio really likes to play cover 1 and cover 3 on either early downs or run situations. So first down, they play a lot of single high coverages because it helps them stay gapped out against the run. Fangio really wants to stop the run on early down so he can get into split field looks on longer down and distances, and especially a third and long. But if it's third and short and third and or medium, they're coming out most likely in man coverage and most likely cover 1. So you need a post safety to play there. I think the Eagles have that. CJ can do that. Sidney can do that. I think DeJean, once he gets up to speed at the position, I think he'll be able to do that. It might be something where that's more so next year or in the future than this year. But I think they have guys that can cover that role. They need guys that can play man coverage techniques, especially the guys that are going to be rotating down into the slot if you're playing big nickel, or rotating to cover tight ends on those cover 1 plays, on those third and short and third and medium plays like I discussed. I think they have that in CJ, and I think they have that in DeJean. I think those are guys that you can kind of put out there in those situations. Reed is a guy that I probably would try and avoid putting in man coverage too much. But I will add to that, these guys are going to place man coverage techniques, or they'll end up playing man coverage receivers when they blitz their nickel, and Fangio blitzes his nickels very consistently. So they will be playing receivers more than you think in man coverage. Also, on top of that, they play man coverage technique a lot in cover 3 because they play what's called a 3 match coverage. Whoever is a flat player, your job is to carry the number 2 receiver vertical or out and essentially take the man-to-man in those situations. So it's very similar to man coverage. And quarters looks, I talked about, you're forced earlier, you're kind of forced to carry number 2 receivers vertical, so you want guys that have some speed and can cover. But these guys do need to be hybrid players because they need to be able to cover receivers to a degree, and they also need to be able to come down and fit runs in the box. So kind of look for that and the Fangio defense. One last thing, they typically don't do this in the Fangio defense, but if you have personnel where it's more suited to rotate guys in certain roles, so like I talked about, a Cam Chancellor box safety type of player, and then maybe you have an Earl Thomas deep safety type of player, you can switch your safeties rotate to the strong and weak side to try and get more of a free safety, strong safety type roles for your players. So if you want to have a guy that plays the run or plays in the box more, then have him as the weak safety, and the strong safety is going to play in coverage more often. So they can do that. It's not something Fangio's defenses have typically done, but it's a weak safety that is more likely to rotate down into the box. So just a few things about how Fangio uses his safeties. But having said that, I think, we've reached the end of our defensive previews and reviews of their 2023 and previews of their 2024 seasons. So I think it might be a good time to take a step back and look at the overall defense as a whole and look at what are some of the strengths of the defense, what we think are weaknesses, and then just maybe a overall feeling of the defense overall. So, Eric, I'll kick it over to you. What do you think, if you had to say some strengths of the defense are, what would you say that is?
I think they have so many players who could play at corner that whoever wins that battle, there's a really good chance that's a good player. And we talked about it multiple times. Having a good pass defense is essential in the NFL. Pretty much all the Super Bowl contenders have good pass defenses. You could even say that was the undoing of the Lions, and they brought in a ton of reinforcements in their secondary. And it looks to be a massive upgrade. In terms of the rest of the units, it would be fair to say the D line and the linebackers, it's kind of a wash from last year. Now, that's where the coaching comes into play, and if players can, you know, play as a team as opposed to freelancing, so on and so forth. And remember, we're going from one of the worst defenses in the league, and we know we're going to have a good offense. So if they can just get to that middle of the pack range, that's going to go a long way. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think this defense overall is a whole lot more athletic than they were last year, especially when you start to look at what happened once injuries started to hit this team. They just became a slow unit. So let's just look at some of the players that had to play. Bradbury, cooked. Morrow was just not keeping up with guys. Ricks was playing out of position, having to play in the slot, and he's not a fast player either. And we've talked about in our cornerback discussion that slot role is important in the defense because you need to be able to cover that underneath space that Fangio is trying to force that ball into. Even Byard, who I thought probably got a little bit more blame and hate than he probably should have. I think expectations or people thought he was going to come in and change the defense around, and because he didn't, people thought he wasn't that good. I thought he was better than what most people thought, but here's the thing, you could definitely tell he is not the same athlete he used to be in his all pro seasons. So you move those players out. You swap Bradbury for one of the 4-2 or 4-3 guys that they have on the team now. You swap Ricks in the slot with, again, another either Maddox, who was a 4-3, 4-4 guy, DeJean 4-4 guy, like Sidney Brown, if he's playing big nickel, is much faster than Ricks was. You swap Devin White for Morrow, or if it's Zach Bond that takes that position, or Oren Burks, significantly faster upgrades in them, and Cunningham too. Cunningham just had good length that allowed him to kind of cover just
Slay,
a little bit more space.
He had the knee cleanup.
Yeah, Slay should
be faster.
Yeah, he could be faster. Byard, you swap at safety for CJ. I mean, this is a unit. A big part of football is, like I said in the cornerback discussion, it's funneling the ball to a certain spot and then running there as fast as you can. And this team is a lot faster than they were last year. So I think that improves the defense. Just that there overall. You mentioned depth of the secondary. I think competition should breed a much better group. So I think that will be a strength. Are they going to be an elite unit in their secondary? I don't know. Probably not. But I think they'll be much better than last year. And I think it's hard to be worse than they were last year. But two other people I want to mention, I think their star power on their front line can really carry this team and be pretty exciting. Just if you look at Jalen Carter and what he can become, especially after his beast of a rookie season. Check out our companion video we did on our in-depth video we did on Jalen Carter to see that. And then you add Bryce Huff. He has some elite metrics, and there's a good reason to think that he can carry that on even in a bigger role. Now we still need to see it, but if those guys can hit and continue their growth, like we expect, I mean, that's a formidable 1-2 punch as a pass rush unit. Now, jumping into weaknesses, I think you mentioned it. The linebacker unit overall, I would consider a weakness. I would add in second pass rusher from the defensive tackle group. This is more of a luxury need. A lot of teams don't even have a good defensive tackle, a good pass rusher at defensive tackle. So this is more of a luxury need. And you can kind of fill in those spots by being creative, using different personnel packages and different stunts and different movements and different blitzes. And these are all things Fangio does. So I think he can overcome that. Now, What I think is an issue is if Carter gets hurt, well, you're kind of struggling right there to generate a pass rush. I think your third edge rusher, there's a lot of question marks about that. BG's been very efficient in his limited snaps, but if one of these starters gets hurt and someone has to step up and play 500 to 600 snaps, I don't know who that is. BG's not doing it, and Nolan Smith will have to take a big step up if he's going to be a player to fill that role. So I think those are
Zach Bond, baby.
Yeah, right. And then lastly, before I kick it back to you on if you had anything else to add for weaknesses, there are a lot of question marks. We go into every offseason and we assume growth from our favorite players and from our team, but that doesn't always happen. And more likely than not, as players will only get a little bit better, especially at this point in their career. So we assume Carter will get better, and I really do, but what if it doesn't happen? We assume Milton Williams is going to step up and take on a bigger role. He might not become a better pass rusher than what he is right now and what he's shown through his first 3 years of his career. Reed might not get better. Ringo might, he might get stuck at where he's at. Dean, the same thing. Nolan Smith, we're asking him to take a step up. There are a lot of question marks on the defense. Now, if you give some of those players a hit, I think that really helps things. And you do have depth at other positions that should mitigate some of those weaknesses. But linebacker unit, who's some of our depth pass rushers at different positions, and answering some of those question marks, I would say, is probably some of the weaknesses of the unit, of the defense.
Yeah, for me, it's continuity and experience. After Slay, there's not any guys out there who are like 10-year veterans. Now, you don't want too many of them because then you end up with a slow defense. But continuity, I mean, you have, 5, 6 new starters minimum and a new defensive coordinator. That doesn't magically just come together and be to its peak performance right away, especially early on in the season. There will be growing pains. We have to give permission to the players to develop throughout the season, knowing that they have a lot, like there's going to be a lot of new roles and a lot of new teammates where cohesiveness matters. Just to give concrete examples to that, like if a term you'll hear is match, carry, and deliver. Well, if you're matching, carrying, and then delivering faster than the guy next to you thinks that you're going to deliver him, then you left a hole in your zone. Well, that's something that can be fixed over time. And so you need to know like the tendencies of the players around you to really hone in on that. So that's what I see as the major weakness. Fangio has said that he wants to end his career here. So that's why I really hope they get the core pieces in place like they've done with the offense and keep the band together. I view it as a 3 to 4 year process. So you hope that they can be competent, hold the fort together, make some turnovers, because that's something that was sorely missing, especially in the bad stretches last year. And just be decent. Nobody expects them to be like a top defense. And then as you start to add more pieces, your young guys get more developed. They have more time together. Then by year 3, hope maybe you can vault into one of these top 10 defenses. That I think that's a realistic plan, and something that you can start to outline on paper and build towards it.
Yeah, so you make a good point about the inexperience of a lot of the players, and I think more importantly, because they have brought in some veterans for the team, like Bond, they brought in White, CJ's got some good experience, but I think more importantly is the star players or the players you're asking to be your star players are a little more inexperienced. Your Jalen Carter, Bryce Huff has, I think, going into his 5th year in the league, but he's never taken on a full workload. CJ, I mentioned, they want him to be one of their star players. He's relatively inexperienced for the more of a free safety position, right? And he had a really good year. He's pretty much only played 1 year of free safety, of deep safety, extensively. And it was a good year, but there was stuff where he needed to improve upon, right? So you are asking, it's not just the inexperience, it's the inexperience from the players that you're asking to make the biggest impact on the defense that I think is could be a little worrisome. So, but overall, I have a little bit higher, going through this exercise, I have a little bit of a higher expectations for this defense than I guess you do. Um, First of all, I think they should be much better coached. Some of their biggest issues last year were clearly the buy-in, which is why you saw them go from Desai to Patricia. A number of the players said that they just weren't trusting this guy or didn't believe in his leadership. They said he lacked confidence. He couldn't get guys on board with what they were trying to do. So they lacked buy-in, they lacked communication, they lacked accountability. I think all that stuff should be much better this year, and I think we'll see a better defense just naturally because of that. But like those things I mentioned, they made positive strides in this defense. I think in their personnel that they've added, becoming significantly faster. I expect this defense to be much better next year than they were last year. I mean, it's not that hard. They were one of the worst defenses, especially down the stretch, historically bad, right? So I don't think that's a hot take coming out and saying that, but I actually think they're going to be a surprisingly good unit, assuming that they don't just get decimated by injuries, especially in certain key spots like with Jalen Carter, or if either Bryce Huff or Josh Sweat goes down. I think those are key spots to watch. But I think you got depth at other positions that where if someone goes down that corner, you can fill in with someone else. Same with that safety. Uh, so I think they should be a little bit better. I don't think they're going to be a top 5 unit, but I think they should compete to be close to, fight to get into that top 10 range. So they might not make it as a top 10 defense, but I think they should be right there fighting for it, whether they're 11th, 12th, 13th. I don't think they should be any worse than average. And I think you could see a path to them becoming a top 10 defense, whether there's a big difference between 1 and 10, but if you're 9 or 10, you're still top 10. You might not be Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs number 1, but with this offense, that is giving you more than enough room and cushion to really go out there and compete for a championship. So I thought defense was a big issue, a big liability, their biggest liability last year for sure. And I think Howie did a lot of things to try and address it, not only in the short term, but in the long term. And overall, I'm extremely excited for this defense and the progress that they should make. And I think this should be a good defense and the years coming up as well, just with what Howie has laid down as a foundation.
Last thing I'd say is the ranking of the defense, it doesn't really matter. It's ultimately, can you outscore the other team? So you don't want to get those 40 spots like the 49ers put on you. And there's that yin and yang with the offense where I thought at times, even when we had a lead, there was a lack of trust from the offensive side of the ball that the defense would do their part. And so they would be over aggressive, even when they're in the lead, leading to turnovers, and then the whole tenor of the game would change. And so they really play off each other. If you get a couple 3 and outs, get good ball position, you have a short field often, giving the offense some easy drives, you get some leads, make the other team one-dimensional so your secondary can really flex the talent that we have out there. That's when everything starts to come together. And they have a way higher chance of doing that this year as opposed to last.
Yeah, and that whole offense defense back and football's a unique sport because most sports you play offense and defense. Football's a different sport where you play offense or you play defense, especially once you get past the high school level. So if one unit is really carrying the other unit, you can get some contention in the locker room. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some of that going on offense to defense last year. It is a real thing. It's definitely happened. I've been on those teams where we've had really good offenses and shitty defenses, and I've been on teams where we've had really good defenses and shitty offenses. So there's definitely some contention that goes on there. But having said that, we are wrapped up on the defensive positions. So programming note, we are going to be taking a week off as we prepare to break down the offensive position groups. So if you're watching this with us in real time or keeping up with us pretty frequently, we'll be taking a week off. If you're kind of catching up with us later in the summer, then go watch our shit.